in broad terms, and then we can kind of get more into the nuance of it, what exactly is the Electoral College?
The Electoral College, and by the way, let me start by saying the term Electoral College does not appear in the Constitution. Uh, it's never used in the Constitution. It was not the term that was used by the framers, and it wasn't even used much in the 19th century. In the 19th century, there was a common reference to the electoral colleges, which was the meeting of electors in the capital of each state after an election. The term electoral college as a phrase to describe the whole system really is a 20th century term, or predominantly a 20th century term. So, having cleared up the language right here at the outset, what is the Electoral College? It is a complicated system um, for choosing presidents by states, and that tries to reflect the powers of the states, or it tries to. I'm sorry, tries to reflect the assembled influence of the state. That's not well stated. So let me talk about the specific mechanics of how it works. It's a system where each state gets a number of electoral votes based on the number of representatives it has in the House of Representatives, plus two for its senators. So it's basically the number of electoral votes mirrors the representation of a state in Congress. That's sort of the first step. That is obviously the weight that each state gets in the election. Um, in the Constitution, as written, it is left to each state to decide how it will choose its electors. There is no requirement that there be a popular election. There's no requirement in the U.S. Constitution that there be a popular election. And certainly, winner take all, the system that we know today and that's present in 48 of the 50 states, does not seem to be what most of the framers had in mind. They thought that electors would be chosen by district. At the outset, the first 10, 15 years, actually the first 30 years, but even right at the outset, many states did choose their electors by district. Others did it through winner take all, which was then called the general ticket. And in still other states, the legislatures chose electors by themselves without any popular elections. So you have this constitutional framework of how much influence a state gets. You have latitude left to the states to decide how they're going to choose electors, and then as the system proceeds, the notion is that uh, these electors, and as originally framed, that it was believed that they would deliberate, that these would be the purpose of this was to have people who were wise and experienced and might know national politics. They would meet in each state capital on the same day, doing it on the same day to avoid excessive influence or corruption from one state to another. They would meet on the same day. They would cast their electoral votes. Those electoral votes would be sent to Congress in the process, which we all became vividly familiar with 4 years ago. But there's one other feature which really has to be mentioned here, which is that uh, many of the framers of the Constitution, and this is still in the Constitution, did not think that the electoral college or the electoral votes would, as a rule, be deciding the election. In the minds of the framers, again, there was no party system in their minds. Indeed, they were skeptical, to say the least, of parties. They didn't want parties. There was certainly no two-party system. And the common belief was that there would be three, four, five, six candidates for president. And as a result, it was widely believed that frequently that nobody would get a majority of the electoral votes, because the electoral votes determines the presidency only if one candidate gets a majority. Okay. And then, so they created also what is now referred to as the contingent system, which is if nobody gets a majority, then the election reverts to the House of Representatives, which is the more popular house, um, and more numerous house, but with a strange election rule that every state only gets one vote. So no matter how large, how small, um, each state gets one vote. And that contingent system is also sort of not very democratic as it operates. It was widely denounced, but it was used only twice in 1800 and 1824.
Yeah, it's interesting that sort of safety net because a safety net of Congress choosing the president if one candidate didn't get the electoral votes, because one of the big concerns of the founders was that if Congress chose the president, then the president would be more beholden to the interests of Congress as opposed to the American people.
I don't know. That's exactly right. I mean, in the debates in Philadelphia, writing the Constitution, having Congress choose the president was kind of the default position for a lot of people, and then they would do a straw vote, and most people, more people would favor that than anything else. But then everybody would shake their heads and say just what you iterated, which was that this is not a good idea. Congress would control the president, etc. Um, but that's also why I may also be why they opted for this system, this contingent system, where each state delegation, it wasn't really Congress voting. Um, I mean, in fact, uh, to back up a little bit, if it's okay to say something about the origins of how they came up with this design. Um, that again this was one of the subjects, this was one of the difficult subjects that they encountered. They could not agree on how to choose a president. They kept going around and around in this in the summer of 1787. um, and in fact they got to the end of the summer, uh, and they had resolved many issues, including the two big issues, which would have had to do uh, with whether there would be a bicameral legislature or not, and whether the legislature would be based on population or every state would have equal representation. And then the other big issue was slavery. Um, they got to the end of the summer. They had resolved most of these things, but they still hadn't reached a decision about how to choose the chief executive. So they did what any good group would do at large. They went on vacation, and left behind a quotes committee on unfinished parts, and said, "You guys deal with it. It's Philadelphia. It's late August. Sort of we're tired. It's hot here. So you guys work it out, and we'll come back in a week and tell us what you came up with." And it was this committee on unfinished parts that came up with this. And to say something about the rationale of the design is that part of what it did was to incorporate the compromises that had been made on the two big conflictual issues into the Electoral College design, so that those issues didn't have to be reopened, i.e., that it said, in deciding how many electoral votes each state would get, it basically said, well, it's the equivalent of the number of members of Congress that you have, and we've already hammered that out. It would be one chamber based on population and the other not. And then by doing it that way, they also implicitly sort of transferred the three-fifths clause into presidential elections as well. So in a certain way, the Electoral College is a replica of Congress, although its members cannot be members of Congress, but it's a replica of Congress, which avoids the corruption and undue influence issues in the fact that the Electoral College only meets once and then dissolves. So there's no fear of ongoing influence.